A tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Welcome to the Power of Zero Show. This is your host, David McKnight, best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Leap, The Volatility Shield, and Tax-Free Income for Life. If you are looking for copies of those in bulk, you can head over to davidmcknightbooks.com, or in single copy, best to just buy those on Amazon. If you're looking for someone to help you navigate all of the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, why not head over to davidmcknight.com? We'll hook you up with a member of our Elite POZ Advisor Group. If you're an advisor looking to level up your game, head over to powerzero.com, opt into our free 3-part video series, and we're happy to talk with you at any point along the way. Today, I'm going to talk about the true fiscal day of reckoning for our country and how that should inform important retirement decisions when it comes to the power of zero paradigm. All right, so I'm going to start off with the premise here. Let's say that you're all in, okay? You're all in on the power zero paradigm. You recognize that tax rates down the road are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. You're sitting on the train tracks and you can see that tax freight train off in the distance bearing down on your retirement plan. And you want to get your power of zero retirement strategy executed before the tax freight train comes and obliterates your retirement plan. Well, one of the most important variables, as you know, that you need to consider when executing your power of zero strategy is simply this: over what time frame should you be shifting your tax-deferred retirement assets to tax-free? Now, you got to sort of think back to past podcasts. I've addressed this before, but let's sort of summarize my basic sentiment on this. You want to shift money slowly enough that you don't rise into a tax bracket that gives you heartburn, but quickly enough that you get all the heavy lifting done before tax rates go up for good. But here's the problem. We know that tax rates are likely going to go up in 2026. We know, for example, that if all Congress does is nothing between now and then, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act will expire. So those taxes by definition will increase. Well, that's just 4 short years away. And next year, it's going to be 3 short years away. And the year after that, it's going to be 2 short years away. So what are the implications of executing a shift over such a short time period? Well, to help you understand the implications of all of this, I'm going to be sharing an example throughout the course of this podcast of somebody that has $2 million in their tax-deferred bucket. Okay. Should you be shifting that $2 million IRA to tax-free over the next 4 years just so you can beat the 2026 deadline? Does that make sense mathematically? Or is that approach a little too over the top? Is it a little too drastic? Will that approach force you into a tax bracket that gives you heartburn, gives you a bad case of buyer's remorse? Well, for most people, I think that answer is yes. And I think as I go through the numbers here, you're going to understand why. And if the answer to that question is yes, then maybe 2026 is not the universal fiscal day of reckoning for many Americans. It could be for some Americans. We'll talk about who those people are here in a second. But for people that have a significant portion of their retirement assets in their tax-deferred bucket, it may not be the right fiscal day of reckoning by which we get our retirement plan executed, or at least our shifting schedule executed. Okay, so the following has really always been my take. We have to be sensible about how we're executing these strategies. Our approach can't be either alarmist or heavy-handed. At the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves what the government is likely to do to tax rates over what time frame and act accordingly. Is the federal government likely to double tax rates overnight anytime soon? I know there's some prognosticators that say, get all your money shifted to tax-free because they're going to, tax rates are going to go up any day now, right? I don't happen to subscribe to that. Or will the federal government kick the can down the road until economic pressures force them to raise taxes dramatically all in 1 year? If so, if that's the case, what year will that be? I'll talk about that here in a second. But first, I want to return to our example of the $2 million IRA. If you go to davidmcknight.com, you'll find in the upper right-hand corner a magic number calculator. The magic number calculator tells you how much money you should be shifting to get to your ideal IRA balance by a certain, over a given time frame. And allows you to put all sorts of different variables in there. One of the most important of which is what amount of Social Security you're going to be expecting. So let's say that this particular couple, they're married, they got $35,000 of Social Security, they got the $2 million in their IRA, and they want to whittle that down to the ideal balance, which in this case is about $400,000 according to my calculator. They would have to shift, if they did it over a 4-year time frame, they would have to shift $471,000 per year. And that's if, the money's growing at 5% net of fees. All that shifting, of course, would pop them into an astronomical tax bracket, 37% to be more specific. Now, not all of those dollars would be taxed at 37%, but some of them certainly would. And when we account for state tax and Obamacare surcharge, the marginal tax bracket could approach 50%. How would you feel giving away 50% of that $2 million IRA just so that we can get that money shifted before 2026 rolls around? So scared of what is currently slated to happen to tax rates in 2026 that we're willing to give away up to 50% of our IRA balances in the process. In other words, in an effort to avoid a doubling of tax rates over time, are we willing to double our tax rates in the short term? What if 2026 is not really the deadline we should be concerned with? What if 2026 is not really the day of reckoning for our country? Maybe we should regard 2026 as merely the year in which we return to historically normal tax rates that seemed perfectly reasonable to us back in 2017. I don't remember a lot of people complaining about tax rates back in 2017. Remember what they were in 2017? Not the end of the world, right? Now, I'd like to posit that the real fiscal day of reckoning for our country is 2030, 8 years from now. Why would I say this? Consider the interview I did about a year ago with Brian Boileau, author of Prosperity in the Age of Decline, on this podcast. And as a reminder, Brian Boileau is an economist, and for the last 4 decades, Fortune 500 companies have been paying him large sums of money to predict what the economy is going to do in the future. And he's done so over that time frame with close to a 95% success rate. Now, Brian Boileau says the deadline we should really be concerned with is 2030. He's predicting that in 2030, our country will go into a Great Depression. Why? Because of the trajectory of national debt and the increasingly high number of baby boomers reliant on the 4 things we talk about: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt. These so-called retirement programs, social insurance programs. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to picture in your mind's eye 2 overlapping charts that go from left to right as time wears on. One represents the number of people putting money into entitlement programs. And that number is, as you follow that chart from left to right as time wears on, that number is dropping precipitously as baby boomers move out of the workforce and onto the roles of the entitlement programs. Then I want you to picture another chart that's overlaid on top of this that represents what our country is required by law to pay for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt. And that line is swinging dramatically upward as time wears on. These 2 massive economic forces will skyrocket interest rates, force tax rates higher, and potentially crash the stock market. All these factors could take our country into a death spiral from which it could take several years to recover. So if what Brian Boileau is saying is true, then the real deadline we should be worrying about, the real day of reckoning for our country, is 2030. Yes, tax rates will go up slightly in 2026, but that's not the end of the world in the big scheme of things. We really need to be getting our fiscal houses in order by 2030. That's the point in time beyond which the federal government can no longer procrastinate raising taxes. So if 2030 is the real day of reckoning, and by the way, I think that the federal government probably should have, raised taxes a long time ago. I thought that reducing taxes in 2017 without a commensurate reduction of spending was, just ballooned our debt. But I'm talking about 2030 as the point in time beyond which, if we don't raise taxes, it will just exacerbate the depression that is already slated to happen when 2030 rolls around. So if 2030 is the real day of reckoning, if 2030 is the date by which we should strive to get all our dollars repositioned to tax-free, then 2026 becomes merely a tiny blip along the road to dramatically higher taxes. And that means that we shouldn't really be fixating on shifting our dollars from tax-deferred to tax-free over only 4 years, particularly if we have large amounts of money in our tax-deferred bucket. Now, we have the luxury, as it were, of shifting the money over 8 years, and this has huge implications for how much of your hard-earned retirement savings that you get to keep. This allows you to spread that tax obligation out over a much longer period of time, which in turn will keep you in a much lower tax bracket along the way. So if we shift our dollars to tax-free over 8 years, for example, then we'd only have to shift $260,000 per year, according to my calculator at davemcknight.com. Now, this seems like a lot of money to shift, but you got to remember the top of the 24% tax bracket is $329,850. That means for years 1 through 4, this shifting strategy would keep you in the 24% tax bracket. And then starting in the 5th year, 2026, you'd be in the future equivalent of the 24% tax bracket, which is the 28% tax bracket. Average it all together, and your marginal tax rate over that time period is only 26%. So compare that to 37%. Were you to try to get all that heavy lifting done before 2026, and it's not even close. It's not even a comparison. So the long and the short of it is really this. While there could be benefits of getting our asset shifting done by 2026, I don't think we should move heaven and earth to do so. If we stretch that tax payment out over 8 years instead, we're going to end up staying in a much lower tax bracket along the way, and that's going to allow you to wring a lot more efficiency out of your retirement distributions. Now, all of this said, I do have a caveat. I want you to keep your eye on the year 2024. If a red wave were to sweep through government, Republicans take the House, the Senate, the presidency, then there's a good bet that Republicans are going to extend the Tax Cut and Jobs Act for another 8 years. That means that the current low tax rates that we're currently enjoying would be extended for another 8 years through 2032. What does this mean for you and me, other than a dramatically longer period of time over which to shift dollars from tax-deferred to tax-free at historically low rates? It means that we will have kicked the fiscal can as a country that much further down the road. It will mean that the fix on the back end will be that much more aggressive, that much more draconian. And I don't think any of us are going to like what that looks like on the back end. So in summary, if you have so much money in your IRA that shifting it to tax-free over 4 years gives you sort of a bad case of heartburn along the way, it's perfectly acceptable to execute that shift over 8 years. Our average marginal tax rate will rise slightly, but will stay in those middle tax brackets, what I call the sweet spot of the U.S. tax code. And that will, in turn, extend the life of your retirement savings. Okay, folks, that is the show for today. If you're looking for someone to help you navigate all of this stuff, we're happy to help you. Head over to davemcknight.com. Happy to refer you to a member of our elite POZ advisor group, trained, vetted, qualified personally by me, among the very best tax-free retirement planning specialists in the nation. If you are a financial advisor looking to level up your game, head over to powerofzero.com and opt into the free 3-part video series. We're happy to talk to you at any point along the way. Would love a follow on Twitter. It's at McKnight & Co., at McKnight & Co. And there we're putting all sorts of really interesting things onto our YouTube channel right now. It's simply David McKnight. That's David McKnight. Love a follow on Instagram as well. David C. McKnight. That's David C. McKnight. And don't forget to catch our documentary, Power Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. You can watch that pretty much anywhere you stream movies. That's it for today, folks. I appreciate you being with me, and we look forward to chatting with you same time next week.